Hello and welcome to this new video. In the previous video, you configured our project so we can start implementing and integrating the online subsystem EOS in our game. The first feature to implement and integrate in your game is the user authentication with Epic account. The player needs to connect to your game with his Epic account. So in this video, we will use the easy OSS plugin to implement a system allowing players to authenticate in order to use the Epic online services. Note that in dev mode, the account to use when authenticating must be part of your organization. To start, create a folder representing the main menu of the game. In this folder we will create all the elements necessary to implement all the features of the subsystem. I recommend you to follow what I do to have a well-organized folder. In the main menu /levels/startup, add a new level. This level will be the first level to open when you launch the game. It represents the game's startup level. I will name it Startup. Once created, double-click on it to open it in the editor. Now we will go to Project Settings, Maps and Modes to change the default map of the game by specifying the new level that we created. We can see that the default game mode is the third-person game mode of the template. In our case, we don't want a character to spawn in the startup level, because this level is dedicated to player authentication. In other words, it's a game UI only level. You can change the default game mode to game mode. Like that, the default pawn is not a character. We're going to do another solution. We're going to create a player controller and a game mode dedicated to this level. Then we're going to assign them to the startup level and the default game mode. Just follow me and do what I do. Now go back to the main menu folder. Create a new folder and name it Game Instance. In this folder, we will create our Game Instance object to assign to our game. Right-click and choose Blueprint class, click on All Classes, search for Game Instance. You will see a class named Easy OSS Game Instance. This is the class provided by the Easy OSS Plugin. As announced in the introduction video, your game instance must inherit this class, otherwise you will not be able to benefit from the delegates fired by the online subsystem. For example, when the player receives an invitation to a session, an event will be fired in this class to notify you. Select this class, then choose a name to give to your Blueprint Game Instance object. Open the file and verify that your game instance is parented by Easy OSS Game Instance. If you have an existing game instance, then click on File Reparent Blueprint and search for Easy OSS Game Instance. To show you the events that can be fired by the online subsystem in the Game Instance Blueprint event graph, right-click and scroll down to find Easy OSS. Open it and look for the subcategory named Game Instance. Here you find all the events that you can bind in your game instance. We will discover everything later. Note that this category is only available if you are in the game instance. On the other hand, you can bind any event in any other object by casting to this game instance. We will see that later. For example, if you are in another object, like the character blueprint, you cannot find this category under Easy OSS. The first thing to do in the game instance is to initialize the delegated events. By default, no event can fire if it is not already initialized. To do this, search for event init of the game instance. Note, game instance does not have a begin play, so event init is the similar of begin play. This event fire when the game is initialized. Now look for the function named init all delegate handles. It is an easy OSS game instance functions. This function will initialize all the delegates that your OSS can fire. Now go to your project settings, maps and modes, and change your game instance class in a way to point to the new game instance that we created. Once finished, launch the game in the editor and look at the logs to find the Easy OSS plugin logs. Look for the word Easy OSS log. You will see that the plugin has triggered an error. This error tells you that the plugin cannot initialize the purchase interface for your target subsystem. In our case, it is the EOS subsystem. This is normal, because the EOS plugin supports this interface only in a package game. It is a limitation of subsystem and not the plugin. You can also have similar errors if the subsystem does not support a specific interface. For example, the title data interface, which is not supported by Steam. In short, it is not a worrying error. You can also find the log file by going to Saved Logs. An important note, there are always two types of logs. The first is the online subsystem logs. In our case, they are identified by Log EOS SDK, and the second is the Easy OSS plugin logs. They are identified by Easy OSS log. I advise you to take a look at these two types of logs when you face a problem. Now it's time to start the player authentication process with his Epic Game account. In the main menu folder, in Level Startup, I'm going to create a new folder that should contain the widgets of this level. Normally, it will be for the widget that invites the player to log in. Create a user widget blueprint and give it a name, for example WB_login. Open the widget and follow me. Add a canvas panel, then add a buttons into it. This button serves to log in the local player when clicked. Now go to the widget graph, delete all default events, then click on the variable representing the button, scroll down and click on the plus icon to add the on-clicked event of the login button. Type login. You will have all the options of player authentication under Easy OSS account. We must check first if the player is already logged in. In this case, we do not need to call the login task. Anyway, you can call it. In this case, it will return true because it will check if the player is already logged in. And so in this case, it returns true without proceeding with the login process. The node getOSS player login status, return an enum representing the login status of the local player. Note that for all Easy OSS nodes, there is a tooltip which can display if you hover your mouse over the node. You will have a description of the node and also the parameters and outputs related. Note that you will sometimes have similar functionalities under online, so always check that the node to use is categorized by Easy OSS. For example, you can show the external login UI via the online plugin, and also via the Easy OSS plugin. You should note that Easy OSS implements the online plugin by giving you more options. You can also check if the local player is logged in or not by calling the node is OSS player logged in. Don't confuse it with the node is logged in of the online plugin. Now we will call the login task if the player status is not logged in. Create a branch to check the condition. To login the player, Easy OSS provides two login methods. The first is auto login and the second is login. You can hover your mouse over the node to read the description of each of them and understand the difference. Basically, the auto login is used when you launch the game via the command line. In this case, the command line must have the auth type and auth password parameters. Otherwise, the login process will fail. On the other hand, the login node is used to identify the player via credentials provided in parameters. You can use this node if you want to test the game in the editor. This node should be used in live production. Note that creds can be empty because this node will display the overlay that invite user to provide his username and password. To understand the difference, I will call the auto login node. Then I will display a message if the action is complete. Also, I will display the error if the action fails. I forgot to add the widget to the viewport. I'll do it in a player controller dedicated to the startup level. Follow me to show you how to create a player controller and a game mode for this level. In the startup folder, add a new player controller and give it a name. In the begin play event of the player controller, set the input mode to UI only, then set the show mouse cursor to true, finally, compile and save. Override the event on possess. In this event we will create the login widget and then add it to the viewport. Now create the game mode. Open the game mode, then search for the player controller in class defaults. Change the player controller to the controller we just created. Change the game pawn to default. Search for session and set the class to none. Like this, the game mode will not create a session by default. This is the good practice when working with online subsystem because we want to manage the sessions ourselves. Go to your world settings of startup level and change the game mode to the game mode that we have just created. Open project settings, maps and modes, and set the default game mode to the game mode that we have just created. Launch the game now. We will see our login widget displayed. Remember, the authentication method used for now is auto login. Click on Login button. You will see an error message telling you that auto login has missing parameters. This is normal because we trigger it from the editor without parameters. Now we will test the login node, disconnect the auto login node, then connect the login node instead. For the credential structure, you must give an auth type. This type depends on the online subsystem used. For our case of EOS subsystem, the documentation provides us with the different possible types. Basically, there are 3 types: account portal, developer, and exchange code. We will test with the account portal type. The developer type is to be used with the EOS dev tool that we will discover later. The exchange code type is dedicated to login via the Epic launcher. For the ID and token, we will leave them empty. Because with the account portal type, a portal will be displayed when you click on the login button. And there, the player can authenticate via his Epic account. Launch the game, then click on Login. As you can see, a portal login opens in the browser to authenticate the user. It does not ask me for an email and password because my browser is already authenticated with an Epic account. This will not necessarily be the case for you. It tells you that the application is not verified. This is normal because we are in a dev mode. It will be verified when you go into production and you publish your game on the store. Remember, the account to use must be part of the organization. The login process failed. I know why, and I did it on purpose. The reason for failure is the permissions requested by the application. They are not added to the Unreal Engine project configuration. If you remember, we gave the application the right to access the user presence, friend list, and country. We have to declare these rights in the Unreal Engine project. To do this, go to Project Settings, then to Online Subsystem EOS. In the auth scope flags, add a new entry. Add the missing scope country. Restart the game and try to log in again. Once the authentication is complete in the browser, return to the editor. You will see the message success in the viewport. Thus, a log of Easy OSS informing you that the callback was successful. There you go, you have successfully authenticated your player with the Epic online services. This was just to show you the use case of login node with credentials. Along this tutorial, I want to use the auto login node because I will always launch the game via the command line. It's more convenient because I don't want to go to the browser every time to authenticate the player. We will see that with the Auth Dev tool provided by the EOS SDK. Now I will show you how to launch the game or multiple game instances via the command line. I will use VS Code to create a bat script which allows me to launch the game with parameters passed on the command line. You can use any IDE if you don't have VS Code installed. In your project folder, create a file and name it player1.bat. It is used to launch an instance of the game for the player one. I will test with an empty auth login and auth password to show you the auto login error callback. Run the game by double-clicking on the player1.bat file. As you see, the error indicates that the parameters provided are invalid. To get the auth login and auth password, we will proceed to the configuration of the EOS Auth Dev tool. First, go to the folder of EOS SDK of Unreal Engine. In SDK Tools, you have a zipped folder for the dev tool Win3264. Unzip it. Look for the EOS Dev Auth Tool executable file and pin it to your bar. Once finished, open the Auth Dev Tool application. Choose a port. I will leave the default port 8081. Click on Start. I already have accounts added in the tool. I will delete them to show you how to add accounts. Click on Login and sign in with your Epic account. When the login process is finished, give a password to this account. This will be the auth password to provide in the command line. Once finished, repeat the same process for the other accounts. Remember, all accounts must be part of your portal organization. Go back to your IDE, fill in the values of auth login and auth password. Note in auth login you must give the right port number of the auth dev tool. In my case it is 8081. For the auth password it will be the name I gave for the first account added in the tool. Run the script to test the auto login of player 1. The login of player 1 should complete successfully. If not, check your parameters in the command line. Now I will duplicate the script of player 1 to create the commands of players 2 and 3. The only thing to change is the auth password. Once finished, launch the 3 scripts. Test the login of each player and check that everything goes well. You can also display the live logs with the game instance running. Just add -log to your script. As you can see what happens with each action made by the player. It also allows you to understand the reasons for failure if ever it happens. You can also always get the logs in the saved logs folder. That's all for this video. See you in the next one.